John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN. A lot of coaching news as we touched on yesterday. We'll dive into a little bit more today. I want to start off with that, John. Were you surprised the Colts decided to bring back both Pagano and Grigson?
No, because Jim Irsay had said back at the winter meetings in December that was likely going to be the case, and unless you think he was a liar. I think he made his decision last year when he brought him back, and I think things are back on the right direction in Indianapolis, but it's going to take a while to build up around Andrew Luck. But the good news is he's back on the right trajectory. He was healthy after the injury-plagued 2015, and as I said, if you're going to fire one or the other, you would have done it last season. I think coming back this season, they proved at least that they weren't children this time around. They didn't fight. There wasn't all the backbiting. So they'll get one more year. But if it's another mediocre season where you have by far, and when I say by far, I mean by leaps and bounds the best quarterback in that division, and you're not competing for a division title, well, that'll probably be the end of the line.
Yeah, Grigson and Pagano, there's been a lot of talk that they didn't get along, and there's, Grigson, this is a guy who was the executive of the year at one point, right? He won the executive of the year award in 2012. Some people thought that he might have been out and Pagano would have been gone, or vice versa. But I thought Grigson at least identified and did a good job fixing the offensive line this year. So, cracks happen, things happen, but I think this is a big offseason for him.
Yeah, I agree with that, and you're right, because the offensive line in 2015, that was one of the worst in football, and that was one of the reasons Luck had such an injury-plagued year. And it starts with Ryan Kelly, who's, I think, going to be really, really good for a really long time. So I think that's what Jim Irsay saw. He saw that they're moving back in the right direction, and that, as you mentioned, the backbiting wasn't there. And the fact that, hey, Grigson and Pagano were undermining each other in 2015, but they weren't this season. So I think that was enough for him.
Talking with John McMullen, a little NFL news and notes. Grigson's in, Pagano's in, some other coaching news before we get to the games. How about the Redskins putting in a request to interview Paul Guenther? Bengals said no, but interesting that was where their mindset was.
Yeah, I mean, they're looking at a lot of people. There's Gus Bradley talked going to Washington. There was obviously the Wade Phillips talk.
I thought Gus Bradley was tied to Anthony Lynn. No.
Yeah, hey, you can say you're tied to Anthony Lynn, but there's no guarantee Anthony Lynn's getting the job. I think he will. I think he'll ultimately end up with the Bills job, but by no means is that 100%. So if you're Gus Bradley, you can have a lot of respect for Anthony Lynn, and you can like him. But if you have a concrete job offer, and it's a good job, and some would say the Redskins defensive coordinator position shapes up as one that could be a good situation, you might have to go in that direction, even if you prefer to stick with Anthony Lynn.
All right, John McMullen here, taking a look at some of the NFL stories. How about the story in Buffalo kind of coming out that they intend to move on from Tyrod Taylor? I know that he's not great, but is that a smart decision for this Buffalo organization to move on from Tyrod Taylor? Because I don't know where they're finding the guy.
Yeah, I mean, he's played well enough. I just think people don't realize it's amazing. You hear $30 million because that's the number Tyrod Taylor would essentially be guaranteed over the next 2 seasons if the Bills move forward with him. And that number seems gargantuan to people, but it's $15 million a year for a quarterback. And we talk about it all the time. Sam Bradford and Brock Osweiler set the market last season, and they make $18 million a year. That's the going rate to play the position in this league if you're an average or even below average in the case of Osweiler, quarterback. And Taylor's certainly better than Brock Osweiler. So to say, I don't want to pay that guy $15 million, well, good luck in finding somebody who's better. I mean, there's no question you would like improvement at that position, but it's easy to talk about it. It's hard to get it accomplished because there aren't enough good quarterbacks to go around in this league. And I think he's proven over the last 2 seasons that as far as the guys who are sort of in that middle ground, whether you want to call it average, mediocre, whatever adjective you want to use, he's certainly at the upper end of that group. He's got dual threat capability. And remember, Sammy Watkins wasn't healthy for a lot of this year. Offensive line had some issues. So if you put better pieces around him, there's nothing that says he's not going to improve. So I find it strange, other than the fact that people hear numbers like 30 million and their jaw kind of drops, and they don't realize just what it costs to pay a veteran quarterback in this league. And I'm not talking just about fans. I'm talking about people in the industry.
Well, John, since you mentioned numbers, we're talking with John McMullen, our Eagles insider and NFL analyst for FanRagSports.com. I saw a great article that talked about offensive line, and, we've talked about the offensive line week in and week out around that position around the NFL is lacking. But the article that I saw is talking about specifically the guards and how top guards are now making more money than a lot of top centers, and that the guard is now a position where they're throwing a lot. Of course, left tackle will always be a high-paid position, but are you surprised to see that the guards are now outpacing some of the top center salaries?
No, not really. Interior linemen generally make less than, as you mentioned, tackles. And it sort of always goes inside. Centers have always been sort of low man on the totem pole as far as value, because teams in this league think they can find competent centers later in the draft, think they can teach guys who maybe play guard at the college level to play the position at the pro level if they have the requisite skill set. So it's always been that kind of position that's been devalued a little bit. But as a whole, the offensive line, I think things are changing. I don't think it has to do with the guard position. I think it has to do with there's such a dearth of good offensive linemen that if you have a good one at any position, be it tackle, guard, or center, you're willing to pay, because guys coming out of college are just not ready to play because they're coming from the spread offenses. They're not used to engaging. They're asked to block for basically 2 seconds and then release. And then they get to the pro level, and I have no idea what they're doing. So I think when people get good offensive linemen, and that's the reason, hey, Dallas is 13-3 and the number 1 seed in the NFC, 3 All-Pros again, Teron Smith, Zach Martin, Travis Frederick. When you get good ones, hey, you're willing to pay them.
Yeah, that article did talk a lot about how a lot of converted tackles, too, were being put into the guard position once they got to the NFL. Well, let's continue to look around the league a little bit. And the Texans, they just reeled off their 3rd straight 9-victory regular season, 2nd consecutive AFC South winning campaign under their head coach, Bill O'Brien. And yet, Jason La Canfora from CBS Sports reporting that Bill O'Brien's job is in jeopardy. Should O'Brien be under the microscope with the quarterbacks that he's been given?
No, he certainly shouldn't. As you mentioned, he's won back-to-back division titles. And listen to these names: Brian Hoyer, Ryan Mallett, T.J. Yates, Brock Osweiler, Brandon Weeden, don't forget him, and Tom Savage. And he's won 2 consecutive division titles. I don't care if it's the worst division in football, which it is. That is overachieving. And obviously the defense is the strength. In Houston, it was number 1 in the entire NFL. And remember, it was number 1 without J.J. Watt. So you can imagine how good that defensive side of the ball would have been if Watt was out there with Jadeveon Clowney and Whitney Merciless and all those guys. But hey, Bill O'Brien would, and by the way, Jason's right. If they lose this game and lose it badly, they might revisit Bill O'Brien, but it's for the reason that he benched Brock Osweiler for Tom Savage. He's trying to win football games, and the GM, Rick Smith, down there is basically, obviously, the guy who paid Brock Osweiler $18 million, and that does not look good on him. When you have a head coach benching a guy you just paid all that money to. So I think it has more to do with that. And if Smith, if it's a sinking ship, he's going to blame the other guy. And we see it all the time in the NFL. Blame somebody else for your mistake, and you can sort of move forward. And obviously Rick Smith is in a position of power in Houston.
John, although he hasn't met yet with Denver officials, there's reports out there that the Dolphins defensive coordinator Vance Joseph has emerged as the frontrunner to become the Broncos head coach. Do you think he is a good candidate for the Dolphins, a defensive-minded guy for John Elway?
Yeah, I mean, he's well-respected. He's another guy, and this is one of the reasons why Marvin Lewis continues to have his job. He comes from really Cincinnati. He's only been in Miami for 1 year as the coordinator. He comes from that Marvin Lewis, Mike Zimmer, Paul Gunther tree in Cincinnati, and people have so much respect for that program that the Bengals have built. So, yeah, I mean, he's legit, and if it's not Denver, it might be Jacksonville. They have tremendous interest in him as well. But, hey, look, this is another example of somebody trying to hit a home run with the young coach and trying to get a guy who's going to be there for an extended period of time. Because as good as we think Van Joseph is, we think he might be down the line, he's not Wade Phillips as a defensive coordinator. And Wade Phillips put together one of the best defenses of all time in Denver over the past couple of seasons. So I mentioned a little bit yesterday, I don't understand why John Elway is so willing to just throw that away.
Yeah, I'm surprised by that name as well. Dolphins D coordinator Vance Joseph, Sports Bash 97.3 ESPN. A lot of coaching stuff out there. As Pete mentioned, I was surprised, too, by the Bill O'Brien stuff. He was a guy that I really liked for Philadelphia back in 2013. They went with Chip Kelly to get by with the quarterbacks that they have gotten by with. It's unbelievable. I don't know that he's an elite coach, but I would think he's a pretty darn good coach to win. Now, some people say they had a really good defense out there, but I was surprised to hear that, as well as hearing guys like Mike Smith getting an interview, the former Falcons coach. You got Sean McDermott getting interviews. Anthony Lynn has been getting a lot of interviews. Shanahan's been getting a lot of interviews. So who's the first team to make a move, do you think?
Well, it's interesting. If I had to guess, I think, because Denver has such a cemented plan, they're such a good organization, they might be the first to strike because Elway probably already has in his mind what he wants to do. Generally, when you're looking for coaches, it's the dysfunctional organizations, and it starts this time with Buffalo and Jacksonville. We talked about San Diego yesterday. You got to wait to see for January 15th where they're going to play. So many of these organizations are just a mess in the front office. I kind of think Denver will be first only because they always have a plan.
Yeah, and it seems like sometimes in the NFL, being the team that waits around seems to be, you don't want to be the first team that goes out there, but you would think you would want to be. But in years past, the teams that have kind of seem like they've made out by just being patient and kind of doing their homework. So we'll see how it all plays out. the coaching carousel thing to me is so intriguing. I always love to see all these teams interview guys and try to figure out who they want. It is really the foundation of the personality of where they want their team to go. And we'll see what the hot personality is this year. Offensive-minded guy, defensive-minded guy. We'll see if a special teams guy gets picked up. Let's go to the games, John. I guess we'll start with that first one. Connor Cook's going to play quarterback there against Brock Osweiler. Not exactly heavy hitters there, but does the winner of this game even matter?
Well, I guess it matters to them, but no. I mean, they're going to go on the next week and lose to New England, and probably not only lose, just get their head handed to them. So long term, it doesn't matter. But it's always good for an organization to win a playoff game. And I would think it would be tremendous for the Oakland Raiders if they can somehow win this football game. It's been so long since they've been relevant. You got to go back to Rich Gannon for them being a playoff team. So for them to actually get a win, even if it's one and done, I think that would mean an awful lot to that organization. And I was talking to Josh before I came on. I almost expect Connor Cook to play better than Brock Osweiler. There's no empirical evidence to that. His first snaps were in Week 17. He didn't play all that well, but Osweiler's so bad, I just almost expect him to play better.
Wouldn't be surprising. I agree. Osweiler's just horrendous. The fact that he's starting a playoff game, making the money that he's making is even more crazy. But you look at these two teams, you would think that, I don't know who has the advantage, but Houston's got the better defense. Does that give them a slight advantage with Osweiler over Cook?
Yeah, it does. They have the number one defense in the NFL. So
without Watt.
Yeah, exactly. And that tells you how talented they are defensively, because you can imagine how good they would have been if J.J. Watt was healthy all season. But Jadeveon Clowney has come on and become the player we all thought he was going to be coming out of college, and they have Whitney Merciless on the other side. So they have the two great edge pass rushers. They have good corners. Brian Cushing has been healthy in the middle of that defense. So it's really, really good. And, hey, make no mistake, I mean, they're licking their chops because they know they get a rookie quarterback starting his first NFL game in the postseason. Hasn't happened in this century, so it doesn't happen very often, and that defense is swimming. It's like blood in the water. They're sharks, and they're going to go after Connor Cook.
Lions have lost 8 consecutive playoff games, tied for the longest postseason losing streak in NFL history. Their last win in 91, they beat Dallas 38-6 in that game. Matt Stafford was 3 years old at the time. They've also never won in a wild card. We know they do not have great history. If you don't have great history and you have a mediocre team, is going to Seattle the remedy?
No, it isn't. I guess if you want to hang your hat on something for Detroit, it's the fact that Seattle hasn't been the same team since Earl Thomas went down with that injury, and they're not the same team. It may be somebody else to take advantage of that, but not the Detroit Lions. You mentioned. Bob Quinn came out earlier this week and said Jim Caldwell would be back because he's another guy that I thought could have been done if the Lions end up losing in Seattle. That would be 4 straight losses to end the season. They blow the NFC North. They were in total control. Remember, they haven't won a division title since '93. So that would have been big for that organization. That's obviously out the window. Yeah, I mean, I don't see many trends pointing toward Detroit in this one. Maybe Golden Tate, some revenge because Seattle gave up on him and he's a heck of a player. Maybe he'll turn in some kind of Hercules-like game, but it's gonna take that kind of individual effort from a particular player to even give Detroit a chance in that one.
Seahawks have won 9 consecutive playoff home games. That's tied for the third longest streak in NFL postseason history. Only the Packers at 13 straight. Patriots at 11 are ahead of them. So, John, let's take a look at some more contests on Sunday. Miami and Pittsburgh. Well, Miami certainly can run the football. Do they have enough to stay in this game? Matt Moore, the starting quarterback, or will there be too much offense from Pittsburgh for the Dolphins to come out victorious?
Yeah, I think this is the biggest blowout of the weekend. I think it's a bigger mismatch than even Detroit going to Seattle because Pittsburgh is actually playing well. You can throw that Week 17 game out because Ben didn't play, Le'Veon Bell didn't play, Antonio Brown. So when you have sort of that new age triplets, and remember, it's a South Florida team going to Western Pennsylvania in January, that never bodes well to begin with. And the Steelers are just a significantly better team. And they're significantly better if Ryan Tannehill was playing, and he's not. The backup's playing. So Miami's in for it. I think Adam Gase has done a tremendous job turning that season around, but it ends in Pittsburgh.
Maybe the best matchup of the weekend, John, New York at Green Bay. And you would think the winner of this game has a legit shot to make that deep run all the way to the Super Bowl.
Yeah, and I think they will. And I think it'll be Green Bay. I think Green Bay will win. I think they'll go on to beat Dallas next week. And I think they'll be in a position to make that deep run. But the way Aaron Rodgers is playing right now, I can't imagine, even if you play good defense, that Green Bay is not going to score 23 or 24 points. Worst case scenario for them. And the Giants just can't score like that. They're just not capable. They haven't scored that many points. You got to go back 6-7 weeks. So I just don't think they can keep up offensively with what Green Bay is doing. So I think it's a really tough matchup. And Pete mentioned, obviously, we all know how difficult it is to win at Lambeau, and it's going to be very, very cold this weekend in Green Bay.
I'll tell you what, John, I got to give you credit where credit is due. You said as far back as week 12, I think it was, that Green Bay was going to run the table and win the NFC North, and you were high on that train long before me, for sure. And so props to you for getting on the Aaron Rodgers train and accurately predicting that not only would Green Bay win the North, but they would be a force to be reckoned with.
Yeah, I mean, he's still the best quarterback in football. And I think a lot of people, because the supporting cast in Green Bay isn't what it once was, I think a lot of people started going in different directions and saying, what's wrong with Aaron Rodgers? It was never what's wrong with Aaron Rodgers. It was what's wrong with the rest of the Packers. And now that they've gotten a little bit healthier, they've gotten a little bit better on defense, although the secondary is still a mess. They're dangerous, and they're dangerous because of one guy, because of number 12. And I've always described Aaron Rodgers' greatness like this. Green Bay is the only team in football history where you hope they run their offense. In other words, if they call a slant on 3rd and 7, you want them to run a slant. Because if he extends the play and he gets outside the pocket, you're done. You are done as a defense because he's going to pick you apart.
All right, John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com. Wildcard Weekend. Listen to all the games right here on 97.3 ESPN. We'll talk about them on Monday. John, have a good weekend, pal.
Hey, enjoy the games, guys.